You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. I don't talk in real life about having hoarding disorder, so I talk about it on this podcast instead. And because I'm anonymous, I can talk really, really honestly. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I am here with Dr Jan Eppingstall, a counsellor in Melbourne, Australia. Jan has a PhD in hoarding, so she knows pretty much as there is to know about hoarding disorder. Jan, how are you?
I'm well, and I think I know a bit. I know some things. I don't know everything, but I feel like I've got a reasonable grasp after so many years. But thank you for having me.
Do you need a permission slip?
So we are starting with an occasional segment that we introduced called Permission Slip, where Jan or I bring an item that we are having trouble deciding what to do with, and the other either gives us permission to let it go or doesn't. So the item I have brought is, I will show you, it's called Art School in a Box.
Aha!
And it is a learn lino printing kit with everything in it that you need to learn lino printing. Right.
Okay.
So very much the kind of thing I might do in 10 years. The reason I bought it was that it's a small business that I really like. And though they normally sell for 50 quid, there's a lot in there. It's very good quality. But she was having a sale and they were £8, reduced from 50, right? So I thought, this is the kind of thing I would like to see myself doing. And how can I turn down a 50 quid item that's going for £8? That would be ridiculous. This is why I must never open her weekly "here's what's discounted this week" emails, by the way.
Yes.
And so I bought it, and it is the kind of thing that I probably would really enjoy playing around with. I like crafty things. It doesn't involve drawing, which is where I'm rubbish, and so it wouldn't have that. So it's the kind of thing I would really enjoy. However, it's also the kind of thing I have a lot of varieties of crafty thing I would probably enjoy. And the truth is, it's been around for 6 months and has never been opened. Out of interest, I had a look on eBay and people are selling them for about 35 quid. So I could feasibly get 35 quid for it if I sold it on eBay, which is tempting. You know, it's Christmas. We're all spending a lot of money.
Yes.
I feel like I should probably do that because it is appealing, but in a kind of aspirational rather than realistic way.
I'm glad you said that before I said it. I'm glad that you had the self-awareness to recognise that.
But equally, I love the idea of doing it. I like the idea of being the kind of person who learns lino printing for a weekend.
Yes.
But the truth is I haven't.
Yes.
Jan, do I have permission to sell the lino printing kit on eBay?
I think you do, because really there'll be someone out there who'll probably buy it for someone else as a gift. It's the perfect time to do it. And as you said, it's been sitting there not living to its full potential in your home, although you would like to see yourself doing it. It's a lot of work to get set up, What will you do with the prints after you've made them? Yeah, I think you do have permission definitely to sell it on eBay, because then it will have another life. It won't just sit there making you feel guilty, because the guilt is real.
Yeah.
The guilt is real.
It really is. Thank you, Jan.
You're welcome.
I'm going to endeavour to do that.
Yes. I think that's a really good one. That's really hard, because I can think, I've got in the back of my mind.
You're going, I could learn lino printing.
I am. I'm thinking, oh, my next door neighbour does lino printing. That's a nice idea for. No. What I was waiting for you to say was, I bought 5. I was like, oh, she's probably bought. That's what I would have done. I would have gone, oh, well, I'll buy, because they're £8, I'll buy. So 1. You did very, very well with your restraint initially, and now allowing someone else to enjoy the kit, I think is wonderful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So today we are talking about impermanence in the sense of it as a Buddhist concept, as a concept that can be used in a mental health context, and as a way of understanding our lives and our stuff. So, Jan, let's start with the definition. How would you define impermanence?
Well, impermanence is simply the notion that everything changes and nothing lasts forever. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but it's kind of, once you start to unpack it, there's a lot there to be learnt and to be gained from discussing the concept, I think.
It is. When you suggested it a few months ago, normally when we come up with an idea, I jot it down in the spreadsheet that runs everything with a few notes about what we said about it. This time, all I'd written was the word impermanence under topic, and under notes, all I'd written was Jan. So,
so this is very exciting. This is all.
So yeah. So when it came to planning the episode out and writing the questions, I was like, what do I do with that? But actually, there's loads in there that's relevant to hoarding. So why is impermanence relevant in mental health and in hoarding specifically?
With respect to mental health, our emotions, thoughts, feelings, and even the cells in our body are constantly changing, right? The physical stuff in the world around us is changing, decaying continuously. And one day, everything we own will be gone, and so will we. This is important because our human desire for permanence and that struggle that we have, that we engage in to maintain the illusion of a permanent self, is considered by Buddhists to be the root cause of suffering. Our attachment, craving, clinging to stuff, people, beliefs, ideas leads to suffering, which is it kind of blows your mind a little bit. But coming to terms with this is one of the keys to mental wellness. It's not easy, but it really does work if you can come to terms with it. I think one of the hardest things to help people who hoard realize is that remaining where you are and not making decisions, not having a willingness to try new things and consider new perspectives is fine. That's your choice. But the world will change around you. People will die, relationships will come and go. Your stuff will break, decay, become obsolete. So this attempt that many people who hoard have to control everything around them is futile. And it's futile because of this concept that everything is impermanent and control is an illusion. Control comes up often in discussions with people who hoard, and maybe they're not really fully aware of how much they want to control everything around them. But once they do recognize that, it does open up the individual to kind of seeing things in a different way.
And the fact that things are changing despite us, if we are already reacting with control, if we then panic at the fact that everything is changing around us by exerting more control, we get really trapped in a cycle, don't we?
Exactly. And that it is. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's this, I want to control, change, control, and then in the end we're locked in a cocoon. We can't move, and it happens. I see it so often where you're in a web now of all of these areas of your life, and there's a need to kind of release some of that control, but it's scary.
Yeah. And in Buddhism, there are two core aspects to impermanence. One is awareness and one is acceptance. So there's a paper called The Impermanence Awareness and Acceptance Scale by Sylvia Fernández-Campos. And that explains those two ideas. It says impermanence awareness is considered the cognitive component and refers to the awareness that all phenomena are transient and subject to dissolution, so they can go. And impermanence acceptance is considered the emotional component and refers to an attitude of openness and receptivity towards the transient nature of all phenomena. So that's all quite academic language. What do you take from that as kind of the significance of both of those components?
Yeah, well, that impermanence awareness is simply being aware without judgment of what is happening right now. What emotional states are we experiencing? What efforts are we going to in order to distract ourselves? It's noticing. And I don't know if you've come across Tara Brach, the author of the book Radical Acceptance.
Yes, she's great.
She's great. She speaks of the kind of three qualities of awareness, which she simplified to wakeful, open, and tender, which I really like. It's that capacity of the human mind to be conscious of something. And I love the way she simplified it to wakeful, open, and tender, the way that you approach things.
I think that she often, one of her real appeals is her way of putting things that suddenly make it fall into place, I think.
Exactly. When I was reading that, I was like, oh, wow, that I really like that. But without awareness, we can't make significant changes in our perspective or in our lives. Without awareness, we're going through the motions with no self-reflection or perception of our interactions with the world. And that is really what's so significant about that first piece of impermanence awareness. Acceptance, in acceptance and commitment therapy, is fully embracing our internal experiences without judgment or the attempt to change them. And radical acceptance is defined as the willingness to experience ourselves and our lives as it is. So once again, acceptance isn't resigning ourselves to our fate or putting up with something. It's looking at ourselves and the world we live in as it is, not how we wish it was or how it used to be. It's just as it is. And again, we've spoken about acceptance in this way before. It's not like it happened, move on, suck it up. We're not about that. It's acknowledging the reality without getting hooked by the judgment and blame.
And it's also not, because this was, I think, when we had that episode way back on acceptance and commitment therapy, some of my hesitation about it had been, until you explained it, it's also not, things are terrible, deal with it. Like, it's not if you're in an abusive relationship, accept it. It's a different kind of,
it's a different kind of thing. Yes, exactly. Acceptance is what gives us the ability to kind of diffuse ourselves from the fixed and the changeless and become aware of the flow and change of life that is really our reality. So it's coming to terms with just the ever-changing nature of everything. And nowadays, things change very, very quickly.
I've learned about myself. I first noticed it in a work context, but actually it applies to my entire life. When a change is proposed, I hate it, I resist it, I dig my heels in. All the while, I'm getting used to the idea in my head. And then some point further down the line, I'm like, right, things are changing. How are we going to do it? Let's do it. But I seem to have to go through the hate it, dig my heels in, resist bit. But now I know that that's my pattern. What I'm often able to do is go, oh, this is the bit where I'm digging my heels in. But this is going to get easier at some point in a bit, because I know I'm also processing the fact that the change is going to happen. And so I can recognize that and go, this will be okay in a bit. I'm just currently in the bit where I hate it.
And that's exactly it. You're able to kind of, I see what yeah, there it is. That's what I always do. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, this is me resisting it, and in a month or however long, I will suddenly be like, how are we going to make this change happen?
Rubbing your hands together. Right, let's get on with it. But you were the one saying, don't worry about that. That was just me resisting. Silly old me.
Processing it. I'll get there.
But recognizing that it does take time to process is also good to communicate to other people.
Yes.
Hey, look, I might seem like I hate the idea, but I just need a bit of time to sort of think it through myself.
Yeah.
And that helps with relationships in all areas, doesn't it?
Yeah. If you are in a position to help out the podcast, it would be very much appreciated. You can find out all the ways it's possible to support the podcast at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Each and any of them is valued and cherished by me. Thank you. So let's get on to how impermanence, awareness, and acceptance can affect the way we live, process things, and feel. That same paper says, cultivating impermanence, according to Buddhist psychology, offers several psychological benefits. First, anticipating and integrating the reality that everything in life changes may allow us to respond with less shock and denial when things change. Second, cultivating impermanence may increase emotional regulation and relief when difficult changes or emotions arise. Additionally, impermanence may herald joy when positive changes occur, such as getting a dream job or falling in love. Finally, cultivating impermanence may enhance gratitude for positive effects of one's life that may one day be gone. So can you talk about how those different benefits can look for people like in real life?
Understanding that this too shall pass, that classic phrase, the panic attack will not last forever. The regret that I feel when I decided to let go of something will pass, But it's also understanding what this quote made me think about was that everything's in a constant state of change, and it's a reminder to embrace the present moment and let go of the attachment of the past and the future. All we have is now. If we're in a bad situation, it can change to good in the blink of an eye. We need to be aware enough to notice when the good things come into our lives. That's one of the things, the benefits of this awareness that I think we need to grasp hold of. One of the things I really like from Deb Dana's work, she's the woman who works with Steve Porges on the polyvagal theory. She has it within her teachings something called glimmers, what she calls glimmers. So looking for and embracing those small glimmers of joy in your life, like sunshine on your face, a cool breeze, a warm smile from a stranger, the smell of clean laundry is my favourite, and keep a record of those each day. But the key is looking for them, looking out for that glimmer in the day, because if we're not noticing those, we're not getting the benefits of this idea of change occurring. If we're only thinking about, things that change to bad, there's also the positive, and we need to be able to recognize that and notice those. But yeah, the panic attack will not last forever, I promise. I promise.
So let's talk about tolerance of uncertainty and tolerance of ambiguity, which are things a lot of people who hoard, including me, struggle with. They are related quite closely, I thought, to the concept of impermanence in Buddhism. So there was a paper about embracing impermanence that was about COVID and psychological distress after COVID. And that says, by cultivating an acceptance of impermanence, one can better face the uncertainties of life. Since change is inevitable, accepting this reality can alleviate the psychological distress that often arises from resistance to change, which is what you were just saying. And that first paper I mentioned says, impermanence shares features with constructs such as tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, which have been shown to be positively related to psychological well-being. And like impermanence, awareness and acceptance, tolerance for both ambiguity and uncertainty ask for acceptance or engagement with phenomena that are not stable or readily knowable. Impermanence, awareness, and acceptance not only require individuals to tolerate uncertainty, but also to expect and embrace change that cannot be fully anticipated. So for anyone who listens, who's struggling with dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity, which, let's face it, life is full of, what can we learn from acceptance and awareness of impermanence that could help?
Mentioning these concepts, I remember reading a lot about those when I was doing my my PhD research. I think the research in this area indicates that people who hoard are more intolerant of uncertainty than the average person, which tracks given the just-in-case mindset, doesn't it?
Completely.
What I'd like to say about this is that we can never be completely certain 100% that we've made the right decision. For example, we might be a prepper for the end of the world. We might attempt to cover all bases for all eventualities, but we think we know what might occur in a state of emergency, but really we just can never know. Working on this idea of being able to accept the reality of constant change and flow of our existence is going to help you make decisions more easily, because chances are something will change and the perfect decision you made 2 years ago is no longer perfect now. So trying to make everything certain and unambiguous is a fool's errand. It will never work. So, this all ties into our psychological flexibility as well, doesn't it, of being able to manage that ambiguity, because there's very few things in the world that we can predict 100%. So working on that in small ways, if you can, just trying to test that out, I think will allow you to see the reality of that and come to accept it.
I find thinking in any depth about impermanence to be both scary and quite liberating. For everything we might cling on to and hope to be permanent, there's something you're really glad is only fleeting. A delicious evening with your closest friend ends, but so does a migraine. The Fernández-Campos paper talks about how practicing impermanence, awareness, and acceptance can have negative and positive results, which they say is also consistent with death research that shows that death anxiety and death acceptance can co-occur. Similarly, scholarship on resilience and post-traumatic growth found that survivors of life-threatening experiences frequently report both positive and negative outcomes. For instance, survivors of trauma often report higher levels of anxiety than the general population, but may also endorse greater life appreciation and confidence in one's ability to persevere in the face of hardship.
Mm.
I know from experiences of trauma, they have left me with, an ongoing sense that the world is a dangerous and terrifying place, and also a sense of, if I can get through that, I've got this kind of thing.
Exactly.
So the idea is not that by embracing impermanence, you get rid of all fear and anxiety. It's that you can feel fear and anxiety while growing and healing at the same time.
Mm.
It isn't an either or situation, right?
No, it's an and. It's this and that. But firstly, emotions like fear and anxiety, if we look at them unemotionally, they're information that offer us a way to understand the world and keep ourselves safe. And if we try to rid ourselves of fear or anxiety, they'll rebound twice as hard, like the old thought experiment with the white rabbit. I mean, try for 30 seconds not to think about the white rabbit. What do you notice? You have to think about a white rabbit to check to see if you're not thinking about it. It's a thought experiment that just really infuriates me, but it just demonstrates it so well. It's impossible. With trying to get rid of emotions and bodily sensations, the more we try to suppress them or distract from them, the more we become bound to the things that are causing our problems. And our minds are really accustomed to trying to get things or trying to get rid of things. Like, this is the kind of curse of our problem-solving mind. So you want to get rid of all the fear and anxiety, and you want to have all the joy, but you can't have those without the opposites as well. As there's always a trade-off.
Yeah, when you're blocking out your feelings, you're blocking out your feelings.
You're blocking everything out.
Yeah.
You're feeling neither highs nor lows.
Yeah.
And that's one of the sort of saddest things about it, isn't it? You think you're doing the right thing by blocking the anxiety, but you're also not feeling the joy that would make life worth living.
That makes me think of what Jan was saying last week about the vulnerability of feeling your feelings, and how it is incredibly vulnerable to allow yourself to feel sad, but there's also vulnerability in allowing yourself to feel really happy as well.
Yeah, because maybe you think you don't deserve to feel happy, or maybe you think it's not true,
or maybe you know it's going to end.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
So the paper that looked at impermanence and COVID, I will, as always, list any papers we mention in the show notes. But the paper that looked at impermanence and COVID was talking about acceptance and commitment therapy, and how it's an approach to counselling that helps people learn to observe their feelings and circumstances without judgment and encourages them to act according to their personal values. ACT can not only help individuals reduce the psychological distress caused by resistance to change, but also promote their inner growth and adaptability, making them more resilient and confident in the face of future uncertainties. So you're an ACT therapist.
Yes.
How do you use this concept in your work as a therapist?
Okay, so this is kind of ACT 101 sort of stuff. But first, just a reminder, remember that ACT doesn't actually promise to reduce your anxiety or distress. However, by turning towards the distress, diffusing from the thought and bringing awareness to the difficult internal experience, it will actually have that effect. As you can see, this is like a willingness to make room for the difficult. It's allowing the anxiety, knowing that it will be fleeting, it won't last forever. It's about noticing in the moment what is happening. So therapeutically, I would probably start looking at working on a particular area of the person's home or a particular type of item maybe that the person's struggling with. And we would sit with the feelings together and work to observe those internal experiences and make them external. So speak them aloud. We might build up to radical acceptance of what needs to happen to make the home safe. That might take, a number of sessions, but we would attempt to reach the fact that accepting the reality of the situation without blame or judgment is going to allow them to move forward and make the changes that they need to in their home and in their life. Yeah, really ACT it just kind of fits with the thought processes of hoarding. And I think there'll be more use of ACT for hoarding in the future, as well as I was listening to your episode last week around compassion focused therapy. And I think that's also another area that could really make a significant difference to people with hoarding disorder. It's really interesting research.
And it's impossible to mention impermanence without mentioning mindfulness. So let's do that.
Yeah.
They are not the same thing, but they can work together. So the Fernández-Campos paper talked about them functioning synergistically. Mindfulness may promote impermanence by encouraging non-judgmental attention to one's present changing experience. Impermanence, awareness and acceptance may increase mindfulness by motivating individuals to pay closer, non-judgmental attention to a fleeting and transient moment. And I was a bit hesitant to mention mindfulness because while it's a useful tool, it's become so misshapen with misuse to the point that I sometimes eye roll when I hear about it. And some Buddhists refer to the corporate mindfulness apps and the use of mindfulness in mental health treatment in a way that takes it so far out of the other Buddhist principles. They refer to it as mindfulness. It's good, isn't it?
It's good.
Edo Shonin and colleagues said in a paper, successive westernized models of mindfulness have invariably failed to consider the cooperating or mechanistic role of other Buddhist contemplative practices and principles. Consequently, there exists the potential for an awkward situation whereby Western academicians and clinicians are working with a construct that they refer to as mindfulness that no longer accurately constitutes mindfulness as per its traditional Buddhist construction. So it's kind of basically looking at mindfulness, that mindfulness can be used in a very reductive way that is so far from where it came from that it can become a bit meaningless. But actually, mentioning it in this episode when talking about impermanence felt to me like a way of resituating it in its original context. So in a less reductive use of mindfulness than downloading an app or going to a use mindfulness to be more productive at work class on your lunch break, can you talk about how therapists and individuals can use impermanence and mindfulness synergistically like those researchers suggested?
Well, this is really interesting because it's not something I've really thought deeply about myself. But, mindfulness is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So, and that's Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness that I believe he translated from the kind of Buddhist concept. So that's the acceptance and awareness right there, isn't it? So it's mindfulness is awareness and acceptance and non-judgmentally paying attention to what's happening in the moment. So really all of these other I don't even know what these apps would would suggest to do, because really, I mean, you can mindfully do the dishes. You can, one of the ones I really do enjoy is walking mindfulness sort of practice, but you can do it all the time, anytime.
One of my favourites is having a really mindful cup of tea.
Yes, yeah.
I love a cup of tea. I don't think anybody's in any doubt about that now. But sometimes you get to the end of a cup and you've barely tasted it. And so sometimes really deliberately saying I'm doing nothing for the next 5 minutes, but appreciating, or not even appreciating, experiencing every sensation of this cup of tea, every flavour, every smell, how the mug feels in my hands, how I feel when I'm, is it's very grounding. And also it does make me appreciate it, even if that's not the stated goal, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe there's just this misconstrual of mindfulness and meditation and just kind of the sitting and attempting to push all the thoughts from your mind, which is impossible, and all of those kind of westernizations of Eastern sort of philosophies. But really, as you've just demonstrated, you can do anything in a mindful way. And it really does make that action or that particular activity kind of almost reverential or something. It just really allows you to be in the moment. And if we can do more of that and live less, on autopilot, then we're going to be able to listen to our internal kind of experiences more easily. If we can do that more easily, then we can understand ourselves. And I think that's kind of the goal of a lot of the work that we do, is to try and understand why we do what we do and how we can make changes to interact in the world in a more effective and functional way. Like, I think that's the goal.
So when I was doing the research for this episode, I was really struck that while we're talking about impermanence, acceptance and awareness as a way to improve our mental health in the context of hoarding, we are also living in a world where plastic products, which are as close to permanent as an item can probably get, are being produced at unsustainable rates and overwhelming us all, us in particular. As we were saying before the call, there's nothing we can do about the fact that we may have acquired a lot of items in the past. We can change what we do with them now, but we can't change the fact of having acquired them at all. One thing we can do is look at what we do in the future. But what can the concept of impermanence tell us about our stuff and our relationship with it?
I read a post from this guy called Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's a Buddhist. I'm not quite sure whether he's a clinician or what, but it really resonated with me. And that was, every shining new possession, every little win encourages our egos and helps to persuade us that without our control over things, we would be helpless with no worth or identity. And I really went deep with that. Like, we have this nagging need for security, which is expressed in these fixed ideas, opinions, and we're petrified of change because it threatens our sense of safety and security.
If I've got all of the things, I'll be safe. If I've got all of the things, I'll never be without. If I've got all of the things, complete that with whatever your brain tells you.
Exactly. But we will never be completely safe. We'll never be completely comfortable, and even if we were, as humans, we just can't handle that level of monotony. We just can't. We just really can't. We can't do it. We need, change and excitement, and we need the sadness to appreciate the joy. We need that yin and yang of everything. So impermanence, I mean, everything is going to return to from whence it came eventually, and us holding on to it in our homes under some sort of, I don't know, misguided. What is it? Is it a misguided kind of thought that we can take responsibility for it, or what do you think that is? What do you think we want by keeping it, even though we know it's been produced already, it's sitting there, it exists? Why is it better in our homes than elsewhere, in the rubbish pile or at someone else's house? Or
for me, one of the big shifts I've had in this process since starting to address this was the realization that me holding on to something wouldn't keep it out of landfill. It would just delay the point at which it went into landfill. And
yes.
So any sense I had of I'm doing a good thing because this isn't in landfill suddenly evaporated. And then Casey Davis on her episode added to that by pointing out that not only would it still end up in landfill, but that I would have had a miserable 20 years with it in my house for no reason. And so that sense of I am doing a good environmental thing by not letting this go, I suddenly, that had no basis anymore. That wasn't a logical argument. And and everybody has a different thing that causes a shift. We've talked about this before off the pod. I hear from people, you'll hear from people who say that a particular thing we said made a big difference. And it might be something that they had heard in a slightly different form another time, but that didn't click, but this did. And we've all had that experience. I've had it many times. But I think this sense that it's not in the landfill, it's not in the incinerator, therefore that's good, is strong and is powerful. And because we don't want the landfills more full. We don't want things toxically being burnt. But actually, that's not one of the options. That's not one of the outcomes that we've got available to us. We've not got never dispose of this. We've just got dispose of it now, have somebody else dispose of it when you die.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So I think there is often a really genuine, if we're looking at that particular reason for keeping things, obviously you and I know there are 20,000 different potential justifications we've all got. But for
Yes.
that particular one, the I am doing a good environmental thing by keeping this, I understand that because I felt that for a long time. But I also, that lost all power for me when I had that realization that it's why I think on my Twitter where it asked you for your location, I've put indoor landfill, because that's not how we should be living.
Yeah.
But I do think if we look at that as a reason, I do think it's genuine and authentic and strongly held. But I also think that the minute you frame it in a different way, for me at least, it lost all its power.
It lost its power. Exactly. But as we were talking off the pod, we need to be thinking very clearly about what we do bring into the home. I mean, if we do buy something just because it was cute for the minute, but it's, 100% plastic and, I'm going to be bored with it in 5 minutes, well, then we're actually feeding the machine, aren't we? We've bought it. It's created demand, there will be supply. So we have to be thinking very seriously about our choices when we're out there. Even if we're at op shops, we really need to be cautious around that as well, because it's only going to come into our home and stay there and remain unused if we've got, excessive amounts of possessions.
And there are good and legitimate uses for plastic. When I went for my flu jab the other week, I was glad it was, in a sterile plastic container. that I'm happy that plastic existed.
Yes.
But the plastic coating of a supermarket bag for life, or the plastic threads that are used in fabrics and things, that feels less essential to still be on this planet in 5,000 years. And again, what we've bought or acquired in whatever way in the past, we are dealing with the consequences of that now. But we can't, there's no benefit at all in berating ourselves for having done that. But as you say, when we go to Tesco tomorrow, we can still think differently and make the best choices we can. It's very hard to make fully ethical choices when buying anything. If I want raspberries, again, I want them in some kind of container because they get squished and ruined.
Exactly. And they're in a punnet. You have to buy it that way.
And if I'm in Tesco, I'm not making a fully ethical, purchasing decision already. And that I can only deal with what's in front of me, and I can only deal with what's affordable and all of that. So it's not about making perfect choices. It's about, in this situation, in the context I'm in, what's the best choice I can make realistically?
Yes, exactly. I agree.
Because we're just one person on a planet of billions, and we're doing our best.
Yeah, and corporations are the ones that we need to, we really need to rally around and advocate for the environment with respect to large companies and oligarchs and, billionaires, trillionaires.
I've invoked on the podcast before when I'm starting to beat myself up over a mild environmental error, I picture the amount of waste and energy excess from 1 hour in a Kit Kat factory. That's always my go-to. And they use more energy and create more waste in an hour than I could in years. And that's one Kit Kat factory of however many different chocolate bars in the world. And so we can do our best. And, most of us are trying to do our best in one way or another. But you listeners cannot take on all of it.
No. And I think we talked about this before, about the kind of, we look at the history of the Earth as a 24-hour clock, and civilization is 2 seconds to 12. Plastic, in the scheme of things, is going to be not even a blip. These issues are not even going to be a blip.
I heard on a podcast the other day that the T-Rex lived closer to the modern day than it lived to the time of the Stegosaurus. And that idea that the Earth has been here for a really, really long time. And like you say, we're at the 2 minutes to 12. We as humans are at the 2 minutes to 12 on the clock. And I mean, we've done a lot of damage in that time, but it's a very big picture and we're a small part of it. I hope you're finding this episode interesting. In order to help me continue bringing you content like this week after week, your support is crucial. This independent podcast wouldn't be possible without listeners like you. I pour my heart and soul into it, and I fund the podcast myself. from microphones to computer software to hosting costs. So I'm asking for your help if you can. Whether you can offer a one-off donation or you want to become a de-hoarding darling with a monthly contribution, any amount makes a huge difference. Find out more at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/donate. So we've been talking about impermanence, we've been talking about resistance to change, we've been talking about accepting ambiguity. How can people get started with applying these ideas in their lives?
I think really we should consider attempting to increase our awareness of what's happening when we're approaching a difficult activity in our life, when we're approaching discarding, for example. Talk yourself through what's happening in the moment, aloud. Don't be shy. What you're feeling, what emotions are coming up, what do you want to do to distract yourself? That's kind of a key one. You know, what would I rather be doing? And I want to run away and start doing that. That tells you something. How about when you're at a charity shop? What's happening there? Why did you go? What are you experiencing? Is it euphoria, delight? Is it guilt even? It all starts with awareness. And if you're going through every day on autopilot, something needs to change. So really that's probably your opening is awareness. Let's start being willing to notice what's happening.
A clip I played a while ago in the I do a shout out often at the end of an episode to another podcast or someone that said something interesting. And there was something that blew my mind and has stuck with me. It was a podcast and they were reviewing a book about stopping drinking. And one of the hosts said, I love quitting things because it allows me to see how I react to not having the thing. I will quit coffee for a month. I will stop drinking for 6 months. I will whatever. And I love quitting because then I see, and that is so the opposite of how, whereas I'm like, I've got to hold on to the thing.
Yeah.
And it's really stuck with me because I think that's a refreshing and quite healthy way of approaching not even just negative things in our life, anything in our, how does it feel when we don't do a thing?
Yes.
And we can learn a lot about ourselves.
I agree, because being without something is, it's a whole new world, isn't it? I mean, it does. It's amazing. That's a really great, and it's that curiosity again. Like, it's give it a try. You've got nothing to lose because you can always go back to that thing.
Yeah.
Or you might find, heck, this is amazing. I love not having a coffee every morning because it makes me feel clear-headed later on the day. Or you might never ever want to give coffee up ever again, but at least you know what you like without it. Yeah. I agree. Radical acceptance of how things really are is scary, I know, and it can lead to grieving for what was or could have been. But accepting what is gives you that chance to move forward from a place, of understanding and clarity. So if we want to practice radical acceptance, I was talking with a client about this the other day, and she said she actually went to Marsha Lynham. She paid $1,000 to go to her workshop, and she was the only consumer there. Everyone else was a therapist. And she went through this process of radical acceptance, and she said she bawled and bawled and bawled, but she was able to come to terms with something very, very significant in her life. So to practice radical acceptance, you can follow these steps. Observe that you're questioning or fighting reality. Remind yourself that there are causes for the reality. Practice accepting with the whole self, so mind, body, and spirit. Practice opposite action, doing the opposite of what you would normally do. So that hooks into what we were talking about before, which is really interesting. Practice the opposite action. So, look, it's scary. It's like accepting that something horrible is true. And maybe it's accepting that, hey, really you are unsafe at home and that really you do need help. Or it might be accepting that what you're doing is impacting others. Perhaps it's recognizing that, a relationship that you're in is no longer working. It could be all sorts of different things, but that could be impacting on definitely mental health, but it can also be impacting on your ability to let go of everything in your life. It could be emotions, it could be stuff, it could be relationships, it could be jobs. So there's something very powerful in that, accepting reality of what is really happening. And I think that's down the track. I think we need to start with awareness, though, of what's happening when you're approaching difficult activities in your life and being curious around that.
I think you're right about speaking your reactions and your thoughts and your feelings out loud. There is something more clarifying about it, I think. I don't know quite why, but there is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some research around that. And if you say, I think the motivational interviewing guys talk about that, about if it comes out of from you in your own voice, you're much more likely to accept that as true rather than someone else telling you, which makes sense again. But saying it out loud and like writing it down as well, journaling, etc.
Yeah.
It gives you that opportunity to kind of turn it over in your mind. Whereas if it's just in your head, perhaps it's not clear enough for you to actually make an assessment of it or accept what it is or change what it is or see it for what it really is. So there is something about saying it aloud. I really believe that.
And also, I think this may be just my brain, but you can only really say out loud one thing at once. Whereas if I'm just thinking, there's 8,000 competing thoughts going on.
Exactly. And also you might be seeing it in it could be images, it could be, we don't all, our inner world isn't all the same. So that's why saying it aloud can actually make a huge difference for some people. And it might not make that much difference for others. It just depends. Like I might hear myself speaking in my head, but you may not.
Yeah.
So we're all different.
Yeah. So, Jan, it is extra question time. Pick a number between. This is the bit where I ask guests an extra question. It's sometimes a slightly silly one. And Hoarding darlings get access to this extra question and the answer. If you would like to become a Hoarding darling, to get access to the extra question and some extra stuff from me every month, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So, Jan, if people want to find you online, where can they do that?
Instagram and X. You can find me at stuff_ology, or you can pop over to Facebook on Stuffology Consulting. Not really over there that much, I must admit, but you can find me on my website, stuffology.com.au, and sign up for the newsletter while you're there. Shoot me an email, jan@stuffology.com.au. I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you as always, Jan.
Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat today about impermanence. Excellent. May we take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record and listen to this podcast today. I am speaking on the lands of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge their connection to country, both land and sea, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
So shout out this week to a podcast called The Grey Area, which I will link to in the show notes. On this episode, Maggie Jackson is talking about coping with uncertainty when you already live with precarity. Have a listen.
If you come from a place of precarity, or if you exist in that space, comfort with uncertainty may not be a luxury you can afford. If you don't feel safe for good reasons, uncertainty takes on a different hue. And that's something that's definitely worth acknowledging.
Yes, and there are tremendous costs living in situations where you're experiencing higher degrees of precarity. But at the same time, I think it's really important for many, many people today to understand, again, that adaptability is a skill that maybe we all have to cultivate. We don't want anyone to live in poverty or to be abandoned in an international institution, an orphanage. But at the same time, we do all of ourselves an injustice by not understanding the full spectrum of human capability to adapt.
It's worth thinking about. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast. And that first paper I mentioned says impermanence shares features with constructs such as tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, which have shown to be positively related. Sorry, I meant to say, I'll say that again because I said intolerance, which makes the rest of it make no sense. Impermanence shares features with
Practice of radical acceptance. You can follow these steps that Tara Brach said. Batch.
I often hear Brach.
Tara Brach. Brach?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh,
I've heard Brach, but I don't know if that's correct.
So to practice radical acceptance, you can follow these steps.